Hello, can everyone hear me? Welcome to today's Cavern tour. As you can see, we're starting out in kind of an extension of last week's Cavern tour, in that we are covering the Urkana silo. This structure is popularly named the Urkana silo or the city silo, depending on who you talk to, among explorers. It's called a silo because of its overall shape, not because anyone knows what the building was actually used for. It might have been a storage building, it might have been something else. Guildmaster Kadish purchased this building at the same time he purchased Urkana, sometime before the fall of Denis in Denis year 9400, which was about 1744 on the surface. He probably chose it because the balconies that hang over the Denis Lake are surrounded by a wall that prevents other people in the district from seeing what's going on in here. We are located in the Ashman district of Denis, which is a long way from the city and Agutter Island. Its coordinates are 1,912 Toranti, which is about 11 degrees, 1,562 Shafiti, which is the distance, and an elevation of negative 164 Shafiti. That's about 4 miles or 6.3 kilometers north by northeast of the Great Zero on Agra Island. It's also lower than the Denis Cavern, where the lake level is minus 93. That places the balcony we're currently standing on at about 947 feet or 289 meters below the Denis lake level. In other words, the silo and the Yashiman district are not inside the Denis Cavern. The Denis Cavern is about 3 miles long and 1 mile wide. Instead, we are in a smaller cavern which is lower down. Kadish was interested in restoring the health of the luminescent algae in the Denis lakes and rivers because he wanted to be the grower that had been foretold in Words of the Watcher. Kadish spent a small fortune and a lot of time and effort convincing the Denis elite that he was fulfilling the signs given in the book. One of the signs that the grower would return light to the cavern, and Kadish was seeking a way to refresh the lake algae. The algae was failing to produce the amount of light that Renneref had specified when he wrote the Book of Earth. The specific part of the prophecy that he was trying to fulfill were these lines. The grower will take time. The grower will bring light. The grower will have ages. Take it and move it to and fro. Bring light and give it to the dark places. Have ages and link to them without bindings. And Kadish was basically the P.T. Barnum of his era, in that he did it all with smoke and mirrors. He convinced the Denis elite that he could travel through time by making Annonay. And this, of course, was his attempt to bring light to the cavern, not by creating it himself, but simply by restoring the lake algae to where it would shine brighter. And he was relatively successful. Yisha says that he actually was quite successful from what she was able to find out, and most of the Denis elite actually believed him. The district that we're in, for 5,000 years, has an interesting history. For 5,000 years, the main industrial district of Denis was a place called Nuerl, which had been built in the Denis Cavern near the main part of the city sometime around the 2800s, during the reign of a king called Nidra. Most of the goods and resources from other ages that were imported into the cavern came through Nuero. In the Denis year 5312, or 2345 BC, an epidemic broke out in Nuero. The disease had most likely originated in an age called Yasafa. Yasafa was heavily forested and provided Denis with the majority of its wood supply, including an expensive and rare luxury wood called yema. The epidemic caused widespread panic because many Denis citizens were afraid that it would become another pinto plague, a disease that had struck Denis in the 2100s, lasted for centuries, and nearly wiped out the Denis people. Instead, the Guild of Healers acted quickly and soon found a cure for it. Even so, it was a warning bell for Denis and sparked a political initiative to separate the city's industrial districts from its residential areas. Me'emen, who was the king of Denis at the time, liked the idea and encouraged the Guild of Surveyors to begin looking for stable locations to construct new industrial districts. In 53-59, the move to expand the city got a boost in the form of a machine called Stone-Tooth. Stone-Tooth was the second of the great excavators, and it was much more powerful and more technically advanced than the first machine, which was named Stone Eater. Me'emen immediately ordered the Guild of Miners to use both Stone Eater and Stone-Tooth to begin clearing an area for a new industrial district to replace Nuero. However, it wasn't until 5475 that actual construction was began. The new district was named Uran and began operation in the year 5500, which was about 2156 BC. Its location in a side cavern placed it far enough away from the city to ensure that any unsafe imports wouldn't affect the main residential caverns. It was in 5540 that Me'emen's only son, who was named Ashem, became extremely ill from a disease he contracted while visiting a new age. The name of the age is not mentioned in the DRC notebooks. As a member of the Guild of Healers, Ashem was often a member of the first contact teams that investigated new ages before they were released for use by the Guild of Maintainers. Ashem passed away 6 months later. As a result of his death, the age was not approved until a cure for the disease was found. Me'emen considered his son a hero, and a year after his death, changed the name of Uran to Ashemen as a memorial. It was said that Me'emen never quite got over the death of Ashem, and the sense of excitement that characterized the earlier years of his reign were gone. It was also said that it forced him to turn to his spiritual advisor, the prophetess Tresari. Me'emen apparently spent a lot of time with Tresari in the final days of his life, and when he finally died in Denis year 5549 at the age of 392, he was said to have been contented because of her help. But because his son had died, Me'emen had no heir. He chose his nephew, a man named Adesh, as his successor, probably on the recommendation from Tresari. Adesh would become the third reigning king of Denis, who was assassinated while on the throne. Kadish wasn't the only one, of course, who made use of this chamber. When the DRC came here and began working with explorers after they started arriving, they were also interested in reviving the lake algae. And so they made use of this facility as well as Urkana itself. They encouraged explorers to create their own pellets using various recipes and to experiment with them. The machine that you see behind me is basically a testing machine that would check a few of the properties of the pellet recipes so that records could be kept of how effective they were. After which, of course, they were dropped down into the sample of lake water below us to see what would happen. And that's what we're going to watch for a second, so you'll want to look down now. Mirfak, can you please start dropping some pellets so that they can see the various effects? The best view is actually down through the grate under your feet. Of these effects, the best possible result is the one that you're seeing right now, which is the steady bright orange glow. Everything else is a failure. As you can see, one of the pellets that was dropped didn't even dissolve at all. That's too intense and could actually damage the algae if it were to go on for too long. And that's what happens when a pellet explodes. Now that Mirfak has made the walls of the silo invisible, by the way, if you look up and around, you can see the district around us. This is a much, much smaller cavern than the Denis Cavern. Does anyone have any questions before we move on? As far as the ladder, that's simply to get up to higher levels of the building. these balconies that we're standing on were the things that were of the main interest to Kadish. However, this building, the majority of it, like most Denis buildings, is going to be underground in the doors behind us. Since we can't get into them, that's why we don't know what the building was originally for. But we're basically just on a balcony. This is not the building. That's more of a game mechanic question for Obaz, but as far as I know, the answer is no. You have to drop a pellet yourself in order to get credit for it. Of conversation in today's tour. This is one. These ones basically are going to be lighting up or light up occasionally. Here we go. The first glyph that the one I'm standing next to is a lot of people call it Yisha's mandala, although it's actually a monogram. First off, what we're talking about today are Bahro caves. These are special locations that the Bahro created for Yisha and her puzzles and quests. The Bahro never lived in these caves, do not live in these caves, and never did. Instead, the cave designs resemble ceremonial locations from their homeworld, which is called the Spiral Age. How many people, can anyone tell me how many Bahro caves there are? Okay, those are all good guesses, and they're all wrong. There are only 3 Bahro caves. This cave here in the cleft was used as an introduction to Yisha and her journey. There is another cave which I call the Hourglass Cave, which was used as a waypoint in her Path of the Shell quest, and which contains a petroglyph history of herself, of her journey. And then there is one in a cave called, or a cavern called Radena, that serves as a waypoint for the Path of the Hand quest, and which also provides rewards for those who solve her puzzles. The Bahro themselves didn't seem to have a fixed place to live, or at least if they did, it's never been seen. Instead, they seem to hang around various places in the caverns, such as the Great Shaft and Cavern, where people rarely go. They have been observed foraging for food in the upper levels of the Great Shaft, where at least one has been seen digging for grubs. The monogram of Yisha, which is something that she's plastered pretty much everywhere she went during the Path of the Hand, is sort of a personal mark which describes elements of her history or personality. When you look at it, the center part of it is a monogram of her name, which is a Denis word that means laughter. Then surrounding it in a rosette, there are a number of symbols which are kind of important to her. First off, there are stylized roadrunners or birds. Because of her nickname, Desert Bird, which had been given to her by her father, Atris. There's also a stylized shape on at least two sides, which represents the cleft volcano because of the importance that this place had in her family history for many generations. There are linking books shown on the glyph, which represent her mastery of the art of writing, as well as how intimately involved with the whole, different ages she's become. And then there are two spiral hands. The spiral hand symbol seems to represent both the path of the hand quest that she created, which was quite important to her at one time, and also possibly it would represent her own personal quest to become the person that she did become. There's something that triggers it to light up, and I'm not quite sure that I know what it is. Let's see if I can get it to light. Basically, it's sort of like a motion sensor, so you have to move up to it in order to get it to turn on. I've designed quite a few monograms over the last couple of years, and I don't know that I've ever made anything that's quite as intricate as this, although I've tried a few times. Okay, anyway, let's go ahead and move into the next chamber to see the next sets of glyphs. I'm going to start from the direction I'm facing now and work my way around counterclockwise. To my left and behind most of you, you'll see a figure that seems to be holding a stick. That is a Bahro representation of Yisha, and it's a very common glyph for them because Yisha was a very important person to them. She was the first person who sought them out deliberately to learn from them and who seemed to care about their welfare. So you will see variations of this glyph scattered all over the Beni Empire wherever there are Bahro glyphs to be found. The glyph itself has three states in which you might see it. There is this glyph which does not have anything above its head. There is also a glyph which has just her monogram above her head, which is again the stylized form of her name. And also you may see a linking book above her head which may or may not contain her monogram in it. The next glyph over to the left of the Yisha glyph is a spiral symbol, which has a number of dots spaced along it. Spirals were important to the Bahro, so much so that their home world is called the Spiral Age. This particular one, however, is a style that Yisha uses many times, or is used many times in Bahro glyphs, which feature or talk about Yisha. And it, while we're not certain what it means, it may represent the journey that she took, the path that she followed, or perhaps it is representative of her own philosophies and and style of doing things. Later on, we're going to look at some Bahro glyphs where you'll see a completely different style of representing a person's philosophy towards the art as a comparison. Again, going around to the left of the spiral, you will see a square panel which has a linking book on it and Yisha's monogram on its pages. And that's one of the forms that the symbol that represents Yisha may take when placed over a figure to make certain that you understand that it's her. Okay, to the left of the book symbol is a representation of a cavern. If you look above it, there is a figure which looks like it might be Yisha or perhaps some other person. But the style that you see there is one that you'll see in other locations. There is a kind of wavy line which arches over the cavern itself. Below that are stalactites hanging from the ceiling, and then stalagmites coming up from the base. In addition to seeing that in Eder Kimo, in the Bahro glyphs there, although there it's hard to make out, that glyph is also used on the pedestals that hold the Bahro stone in your neighborhood linking book room, and is used to represent the Denis Cavern there. The final glyph, which is again over to the right of the entrance, is a representation of the cleft and the volcano, which is the location where we are now. And again, this place was extremely important to Yisha's family because their history for at least 3 generations was tied up in this place. Actually, more like 4 generations, I'm sorry. Anna, Yisha's grandmother, was raised not far from here, and this was a place where her family would live for short periods of time when they were making journeys. Their actual home was a place called the Lodge, which was located a distance away from here, and which was more defensible. Then Yisha's, or excuse me, that was her great-grandmother, I'm sorry. Her grandfather, Gen, was raised here until age 14. Her father, Atris, was raised here until he was about the same age. And she lived here for a time before she finally went down to Denis and learned to become the master at writing ages that she eventually became. Okay, do we have any questions before we move on? You may. I might have not be seeing it correctly from my with my screen resolution. So, another possibility is that those figures might be representations of the Bahro, hiding in the shadows and looking on at the events that are happening. I'd have to see a much better picture to be able to tell you for certain. You'll see in later glyphs that the Bahro often show themselves outside the frame of whatever it is that they're drawing, watching from the outside inward. Um, let's see, UTL? No. The symbols in the cleft cave are just an introduction to various symbols that the Bahro use to represent Yisha or other concepts that they want you to know about later. This place, on the other hand, actually does contain an actual history of Yisha. This is the bottom of what I call the hourglass cave. You get to this place from half of it from Annonay and the other half from Urkana. Most people just come here to get imager codes to continue the quest, and don't realize that here in the bottom half of the cave, there is a 17-panel baroglyph series which tells the story of how Yisha created the Path of the Hand quest. It's basically a story of her history up to that point. Thanks to some remarkable wizardry by Mirfak, we're going to isolate each one of the panels and show them to you in order, rather than having the confusion of showing them all at once. These petroglyphs chronicle important events in Yisha's early life, beginning from when she leaves Tomana on her journey of self-discovery. Dr. Watson found out that Yisha left notebooks behind in the great shaft that cover many of the events shown in these petroglyphs. So the story of here is better documented than any of the other baroglyphs that we find in other caverns or ages. In 2006, an explorer named Brett Middleton conducted his own studies of the Hourglass Caves glyphs. He was working based on a study done by the Baroglyph Study Group, and he used their methodology and many of their preconceptions. But his analysis is detailed and imaginative. However, he drew a number of erroneous conclusions, and that's something we know, of course, because Yisha herself left notebooks behind explaining certain things. Brett was one of the first people to call Yisha's monogram a mandala. His definition of a mandala was a quote-unquote decorative form of Denis writing, usually presented in a circular frame that joins the letters of a name or word through overlapping and shared strokes. The mandala may be set within a decorative border. Yisha's mandala is sometimes set with the border decorated by books, a spiral hand, and the desert bird. To the best of my knowledge, the term mandala was first applied to this form of writing by Blade Lycum in the DLF forums in June 2004. And that was his first mistake, because a mandala, which is a Hindi word meaning circle, is a spiritual and ritual symbol from the Hindu religion and is meant to represent the universe. In common use, the term mandala is generic for any circular geometric pattern that represents the cosmos and has nothing to do with writing. Another difference between Brett and the DLF is that he tended to call the Bahro identification mark the weeping eye or crying eye instead of the Baroglyph Study Group's mourning eye. However, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you his analysis along with some notes of my own that explain things that he may or may have gotten right, may or may have not, or may or may have not gotten right. Excuse me while I trip over my tongue a bit. The first four of the 17 glyphs he entitled Life in the Cleft. And he gave this glyph here the title BC1, Yisha Leaves Home. He said, "There is little difficulty in making a complete interpretation of this panel. The staff-bearing figure on the right has Yisha's name in monogram form overhead. Yisha's name is readable in Denis script, and we have seen this monogram in many locations, beginning with the wall at the bottom of the ladder leading down from the journey door in the cleft. The figure with the staff is also found beneath the cleft, and the combination of symbol and glyph identify Yisha beyond doubt. The two figures holding hands on the left represent Yisha's parents to a high degree of certainty, as confirmed by similar representations of Atris and Cacern in the baroglyph sequence found inside the caldera of the volcano. The monogram above Atris and Cacern does not yet have a confirmed reading. Most Denis linguists believe it is the word home written in Denis script. For my own, now speaking on my own, this does indeed represent Yisha leaving the Tomana as a teenager. Beatrice and Cacern are there to say farewell. My own speculation is that she spent a period of time wandering around North America before she eventually returned and settled down in the cleft. During that period, she would have traveled into what is now Utah and seen Newspaper Rock, a Native American pictograph site. Yisha left a copy of sections of the Newspaper Rock petroglyphs in Eterkemo. The monograms in the image are Yisha's name above her figure and what appears to be EHLM or EHOM above her parents. Either way, it's not the word home in English, as Brett reported. She wrote about this time in her journals, in the journals that she left in the Great Shaft. Alone. There is a powerful conjunction between the in and the out, the beneath and the above. A wound, a mouth, a well, a pit. I wanted to make the journey for myself from where the Denis dug upward, where they almost came to the surface. From the place where Tiana first climbed downward and where Father followed evil into the ground. I began my journey with a heavy burden. It was Tiana who came to Denis and caused its fall. I am from her. I feel I am destined to bring another destruction. Father and Mother tried to prepare me, tried to tell me who they thought I was. I still see the power of each. I have the best of each, and the burden of each. And as they watched me leave, I saw the sadness and fear, but more terrifying, I saw their hope. And I left my comfort to find me. And even as I took my first step away from Tomana, my shoulders ached for the burden I bore. Deep prophecies and weighty destinies. So much to learn and understand about myself. My father said we can never understand. We can only understand more. The more I understood, the more powerful I became, and the more dangerous I became, and the less I understood. Okay, Mirfak, the next panel, please. This is BC2. Yisha arrives at the cleft. Brett said, again, a complete interpretation presents little difficulty. The Yisha glyph and monogram appear next to a volcano glyph, also seen in the cleft, and above a depression in which rooms and rope bridges can be seen. The panel contains numerous depictions of desert wildlife, including a roadrunner in the lower left, a number of lizards, probably geckos, and an antelope, or perhaps a pronghorn. Note that elements of BC1 and BC2 can also be seen in the caldera of the volcano, which is also reproduced on the cover of the 7th journal of Yisha in Mist 5 End of Ages. That journal is concerned with Yisha's departure from Tomana and desire to spend time at the cleft. And there's not much I'm going to disagree with in that statement. This is indeed a picture of Yisha living in the cleft. She stayed here for a period that may have been years before she eventually ventured down into the Denis caverns. The next glyph, please, Mirfak. BC3. Yisha meets with local Amorins. Tchela Trelawney has done extensive analysis of this panel relating to the component glyphs in the symbology of the Hopi, Zuni, and Navajo. tribes that resided in that area of New Mexico. For example, the bear glyph above the head of the figure on the left is probably his name symbol. A detailed analysis of these symbols is beyond the scope of this presentation. It is not clear to me whether the fish is being given to Yisha or by Yisha, or what she might have had to trade to these people. However, it looks like there are feathers and a paint pot next to Yisha, and she may have used her artistic skills to create tradable artifacts, much as Anna did when living in the cleft. Of special note, there are the 3 short parallel lines at each of the cardinal points of the panel. The symbolism of these is obscure to me, but similar elements can be seen in other glyphs, such as panel 5 in the cave here. It is possible that they are somehow related to the 3 strokes of the crying eye or mourning eye glyph that will appear in some of the panels in this series. And that was quoting Brett. My own take on this panel is that it's Yisha trading with local Amerindians for food. However, since Eddy County is located in the southeast corner of New Mexico, it's unlikely that the 3 Indian groups that he mentioned are in this picture. Instead, the natives that were the people that were native to this area were people who were called Shis-Inde or Mashkalinda, and those are bands of a nation called the Mescalero Apache nowadays. Trading with these people was a practice she would have picked up from the stories her parents told her of Anna, who did the same when she lived here. The natives would have known from stories handed down from their ancestors that people living in the cleft had medical knowledge and other forms of wisdom that would be valuable to them. The symbol above Yisha's head is a monogram of her name. The symbol above the native in the foreground probably also represents his name and is a fairly typical Southwest design representing a bear. Since it's the only object of its color in the picture, a good guess would be that his name was Yellow Bear. Next glyph, please, Marifek. This is a very complicated glyph in that it's multicolors, or at least 2 different colors laid one on top of the other. Mirfak's going to cycle the color values a bit to try and show you as much of it as possible. This is Bahro glyph BC4, and Brett said, Yisha studying or practicing the art. 2 different enhancements of this panel are shown to, help bring out some of the varied detail of this complex image. This is the first panel in the sequence to present serious difficulty to the interpreter and almost seems out of order in the sequence. In the center of the panel, Yisha is writing in a book. It is uncertain, however, as to whether she is writing an age or simply recording her experiences. However, the linked star pattern beneath her is also seen on the floor of the Nexus Age and in various places in the Cavern, and maybe yet another symbol of the art. Yisha is surrounded by the glyphs of 12 books with inscribed symbols, which we will see again in later panels. The books are surrounded by Dini numbers, which do not appear to be of any significance. And there are 3 lines of Dini script below Yisha. Many of the letters are difficult or impossible to read, but the lines do not seem to form words. Within the circular frame are a number of remarkable elements drawn in white, best seen when the color is being enhanced. At the top of the frame is the crying eye glyph, next to the glyph of a Bahro that appears to have a crying eye on its chest. These elements are reminiscent of the Bahro gathering seen behind the bamboo grove in Eterkimo, and are included in many other baroglyphs. These two elements are flanked by symbols that remind one of symbols seen in Nolobin, which are, breaking away from reading Brett's notes for a moment, those symbols are actually Bahro writing. They did have an actual alphabet and writing system. Back to Brett's notes. Between the Crying Eye and Yisha is a representation of the Denis Cavern, which contains the three central figures from the seventh panel in Eterkimo next to the, which is the mysterious scene next to the right of the journey door. There appears to be a book symbol, possibly the symbol of the maintainers, above the head of the center figure, which also exists in the Eterkimo version when it is examined from a proper distance. On the left side of the frame is a register that contains elements of the fourth panel in Eterkimo, the Garrison panel. On the right side of the frame, there appears to be some animal glyphs reminiscent of the Puffer Garden sequence in Eterkimo. With a couple of exceptions, the elements outside the frame are all related to the other scenes found throughout Eterkimo. The first exception is the figures in the lower left register containing the Annonay spheres. The large figure with a circle on his chest is almost identical to the figure to the right of the center figure of the glyph next to the Bahro door, but with the addition of a glow around the head and a number of follower figures. These figures are placed closely enough to the Annonay glyph that they are almost certainly part of the same register. The second exception is on the center right of the glyph, depicting a figure in a glowing arch or doorway above a book with a symbol connecting the left and right pages. Some believe that this is another representation of Yisha, as the figure is more similar to the usual Yisha glyph than it is to other glyphs representing humans, but I am far from convinced of this interpretation. The most difficult aspect of interpreting the panel is in understanding why the baroglyphs of Eterkimo are represented here, if the panel is in its proper place in the sequence. By Yisha's own words in her End of Ages journals, she did not learn about the Bahro until much later in her journey, as we will see. Does this scene simply foreshadow the knowledge she assumed to gain of Denis history and the practice of the art? Speaking for myself, this glyph is Yisha exploring Denis and linking books to other ages. The pattern she's sitting on is the central plaza tile design from a residential neighborhood. This is a common design found in many other places as well. The age symbols around it, in clockwise from about 10 o'clock, are Kadish Telesa, Rebek, an unknown glyph, Kalo, another unknown glyph, Teledan, and Annonay. And these are the same glyphs that are found in the age of Eterkimo. The glyph has white markings overlaid on it that are much harder to see unless the colors are enhanced. Clockwise from 12 o'clock they are the symbol for sadness with a Bahro, what appear to be various animals, Denis letters, and the age of Garrison. In the center of the glyph is the Denis Cavern and what appears to be the same figures found next to the Bahro portal gate in Eterkimo. It would seem that it was around this time that the Bahro first noticed Yisha and began to watch her. Next glyph, please, Mirfak. Here we begin another sequence. The next 5 panels are ones that Brett calls Life with Callum. This is panel 5, Yisha Travels to Denis. He wrote, Yisha begins her journey by entering the volcano at the cleft, and it appears that she slept at least once on the long journey. She also encountered some interesting creatures. Bats, both flying and hanging from the ceiling, are represented in the upper right of the panel. Frogs seem to be represented on the left side. In the center is some type of creature that appears to have kele, possibly a variety of scorpion or spider, or some arachnid completely unknown to surface dwellers. When Yisha reaches the cavern, she meets a person that scholars formerly called teacher or book. We now know from End of Ages Journal 8 that this is a master writer named Callum. Rather than a monogram, Callum is identified by a book glyph, which the Bahro seem to have typically used to identify writers such as Atris. Note that his ID glyph has 3 parallel strokes at each of the cardinal points, the same strokes that we saw in panel 3 earlier. Although this panel depicts Callum as meeting Yisha upon her arrival, we know from her journeys that she spent a great deal of time alone in the cavern before finally encountering Callum in the library of the Gura. A group of Bahro around a crying eye is depicted just above the cavern. This corresponds to the representative of the cavern in cleft glyph number 6. Okay, actually that confirms that those were Bahro above that glyph that we saw in the cleft. Speaking for myself now. In this glyph, this is Yisha traveling down and meeting Callum. Callum was a surviving Denis Master of the Art. He was a member of the Guild of Writers of Denis. And he was one of the Denis survivors who had been found and brought back to help clean up the cavern after he decided that it was time to restore Denis. That project eventually proved to be beyond the scope of what they could accomplish, and they gave up. And at that point was when Atris decided to write The Age of Relishan as a new home for the Denis survivors. But when the surviving Denis moved to Relishan, Callum remained behind because he was exploring and conducting research in Denis. I presume that he was trying to recover knowledge that might have been lost if he did not. The glyph itself shows her traveling through the tunnel system to the Denis cavern, beginning at the cleft. Yisha traveled down the great shaft to the tunnels just like her great-grandmother, grandfather, and father before her. However, she would have had to stop and sleep more than once because it was a 3-day journey, at the very least, if you were walking at a good pace. What she wrote about this in her journals was, "Home was far behind, and I was no longer a child. I journeyed deep, deep within myself, deep within the earth, down to the Denis cavern. I was alone for a time as I consumed my heritage, breathing deep the air of the cavern and the knowledge of my people. But the desire for companionship drove me mad. I engaged a Cinnamar as my confidant, and a treadfish in the harbor became my younger brother. I spoke to them as family, and they answered. I swear, they answered. Then my mind took a final step into madness when I walked into the library on Agra and saw an old Denis man on the floor below me. Now I was imagining people to ease my loneliness. But he was no mirage. His name was Callum, and he was a Denis writer of ages." Next panel, please, Murfak. I had mentioned in the cleft cave that we would be seeing that spiral symbol again, and here it is. Brett said, foreshadows. This is perhaps the most baffling panel in the sequence without even the most rudimentary interpretation in which we can place confidence. It is very unusual for a baroglyph to be so uniformly abstract and symbolic, with few elements on which we can hang the beginnings of a concrete interpretation or even a representative name. For example, some have interpreted the generic human figures as followers of the grower on the path to the shell. Yet at this point in the story, Yisha does not know she is the grower and has no followers. Likewise, Yisha's arrival in Denis has already been depicted, so it is hard to interpret this as representing her descent of the great shaft, with the smaller figures symbolizing her progress. Spirals of various types are probably the most common and important symbols encountered in baroglyph studies, and a spiral is certainly a central feature of this panel. The same dotted spiral is seen in the cleft. The spiral often seems to symbolize a return to beginnings and the path of water flowing down to the roots of the great tree. Perhaps this panel simply symbolizes Yisha's return to beginnings and foreshadows those who will one day follow her on that path. Yisha is surrounded here by a glorious glow that we'll see again in other contexts in later panels. Furthermore, her monogram is now contained in a book glyph, a theme that will be seen again in panel 10. But it is a plain book here. Perhaps this symbolizes her limited knowledge of the art at this point in her journey, or as another foreshadowing of later events. Speaking for myself, it is unclear what this glyph represents, but it may be the concepts and philosophies Yisha developed regarding the writing of the ages. This spiral is shown in later glyphs and it's doubtful that it has any relationship to the path of the shell for the reasons that Brett mentioned. But I do believe that it may well represent her own philosophies that she's come up with due to the teachings of her parents. Next glyph, please. This is panel number 7, which Brett calls Yisha and Callum at odds, and he had this to say. This panel depicts the initial philosophical gap between Yisha and Callum. From End of Ages Journal 8, trust did not come easily. There was a conflict between us, between his ancient rules of Denis that I did not respect, and my creativity, which he feared. We fought and feared and battled and screamed. On the left of the central chasm, Yisha is again standing on the spiral symbol from panel 6, surrounded by images of desert life and other more obscure markings. This register represents Yisha's free-thinking, imaginative approach to the art, drawn from her heritage and previous experiences. On the right of the chasm stands Callum, with orderly tables of Denis numbers and letters above his outstretched arms. Above his head is a series of 12 book glyphs, which were previously seen in panel 4, arranged in a square. There may be some type of symbol contained within this square, but it's hard to make out. This register represents the disciplined, rule-bound approach to the art, followed by the Denis Writers Guild. Speaking for myself now, Yisha and Callum argued a lot in the beginning of their relationship, according to Yisha's notes. You see the spiral symbol of Yisha's beliefs and a chasm separated from Callum's ideas, which were all about the ironclad rules and traditions of the Denis art. However, Yisha counted herself very fortunate to have met Callum. Her own training in the art had come from her parents, who were mostly self-taught, based on initial training by Yin, who himself was self-taught after having only received a short introduction to writing just before the fall of Denis when he was 6. Callum was a fully trained master and was able to teach Yisha things that she would never have learned otherwise. She wrote, "Trust did not come easily. There was a conflict between us, between his ancient rules of Denis that I did not respect, and my creativity, which he feared. We fought and feared and battled and screamed until exhausted, we began to learn from each other. We learned of the power of both, just as father and mother had done." Next panel, please. Baroglyph panel 8 is Yisha and Callum at peace, and Brett said, "Yisha and Callum work out their differences and begin to study each other's methods." Again, from Journal 8, "We began to learn from each other. We learned of the power of both, just as father and mother had done." Tables of Denis letters and numbers are shown in the top and bottom margins, reminiscent of something one might see around the blackboard of an elementary school classroom. Again, the tables of letters and numbers are also shown flanking Callum's name symbol. The same square of 12 books is shown above Callum's head. However, one of the books has been moved to the side, and the area in the center has been replaced with some of the glyphs surrounding Yisha in panel 7. A waterfall of knowledge or enlightenment appears to be pouring from the center of the square on Yisha's head, although her journal makes it clear that the knowledge flowed both ways. Speaking for myself, Callum and Yisha eventually came to an understanding, and Callum began to train her, filling in the rather large gaps in her knowledge. By the end of their relationship, he was learning almost as much from her as she was from him, which is represented by the symbols of their styles being melded in this glyph. She wrote, "So I learned to write with all the skills that Denis had known, beyond what my parents had taught me. For their lessons were given by a flawed instructor and by their own trial and error. I learned to write from a master, an opportunity father was never given." Next panel, please. Panel 9, Learning Continues. Brett said, "Yisha and Callum become closer. Yisha's monogram and Callum's glyph are now side by side between the two figures. The 12 book symbols have spread out and are now more intermingled with the symbols of Yisha's creativity. Both of these elements show the growth of friendship and the blending of their approaches to the art. However, the background contains an incomplete version of the nexus pattern in which the triangles are not fully linked, possibly indicating that the blending is not yet complete." Speaking for myself, in this panel, the relationship continues and Yisha becomes a master of the art, writing ages that are wonders to Callum. Her work also shocked and astonished other surviving Denis writers when they saw them. What Callum may not know was that Yisha had also found others to train her. The Bahro had their own version of the art of writing and taught her and would eventually teach her their methods as well. She wrote, "Callum's abilities were breathtaking. He knew all that Denis knew when Denis fell. But I taught as well as learned. There were things that the Denis were forbidden to write, words they feared, concepts they shunned, rules and boxes. I had no cultural fear of such things, so I dug deeper, asking questions that Callum could not answer." Next panel, please. This is panel 10, which Brett called Yisha and Callum Grow Together. He wrote, "The basic meaning of this panel is clear, although some of the details of the symbology remain mystifying. Yisha and Callum have fully integrated their philosophies and cemented their friendship. The name symbols of Yisha and Callum are now merged, as is seen in clef glyph number 4. The background, not visible in this version of the image, the background, I lost it, contains a completed version of the nexus pattern. They begin to work together to extend their knowledge in new directions and begin to grow the tree. Journal 8. So I dug deep, asking questions that Callum could not answer, and together we sought answers. That is how we learned of the Bahro and the tablet. I learned of power. We grew in knowledge and strength, and Callum became one of my dear friends. To the right of the merged name symbols is another figure that represents those shown with Yisha on the spiral in panel 6. To the left is a symbol resembling a square monogram, but it begins with a spiral rather than a Dene letter, and the letters do not appear to be a meaningful word either in Dene or English. The outer border of the panel contains 8 of the book glyphs from 4 and 7 and 9, interspersed with Yisha's desert life glyphs and glyphs representing Bahro. There are also 2 more of the square monograms, neither of which contains a meaningful word. The most intriguing element is the glow around the tree, which is the same one seen around Yisha in panel 6. Perhaps it symbolizes the grower, in which case its appearance in panel 6 is another instance of foreshadowing. The position of the glow between the characters may represent uncertainty over the identity of the grower. Also from Journal 8, I began to think that it was he, Callum, who would be the grower. Speaking for myself, at the time of this panel, Callum was beginning to believe that Yisha was the grower of prophecy, something that Yisha eventually would come to believe as well, although it wasn't at this time. Yisha might have begun thinking of ways to free the Bahro from slavery at this time as well, since Bahro are shown in the border around the scene. Strangely, when she first met him, Yisha had thought that Callum was the grower, or could become the grower, and had not a thought in her head that she might be. What is fairly certain is that it was at this time that Yisha discovered the Bahro and their plight. However, she may not have yet made contact and learned to speak with them. What she wrote in her journals about this was, "And together we sought answers. That is how we learned of the Bahro and the tablet. I learned of power. We grew in knowledge and strength, and Callum became one of my dearest friends. I began to think that it was he who would be the grower." Next glyph, please. We're now this is panel number 11, which begins a new sequence called The Battle Against Evil by Brett. These panels represent the most dramatic and exciting portion of the sequence. While the fundamental meaning of the subsequence is clear, each panel contains details that are almost maddeningly mystifying, and Yisha's journals from End of the Ages are nearly silent concerning these events. We can only hope the full story is someday revealed, clarifying the motives behind the battle and the methods used. Speaking of this particular panel, Brett wrote, Yisha and Callum meet evil. Yisha and Callum meet someone new in the cavern. The meeting appears peaceable, suggesting that the pair did not suspect the hostility that the newcomer would eventually reveal. The new figure is typically referred to as the evil book or the enemy, and has not yet been identified. He appears to be a writer, since his ID glyph is a book with outward-pointing arrows at the cardinal points. But Yisha's journals do not name him. Remarkably, he also appears to be wearing some type of headgear or helmet. The depiction of the cavern follows the usual symbolism, with the crying eye at the top of the cavern and groups of Bahro above the roof. Again, The intriguing glow makes an appearance in this panel, but now surround Evil Book's ID glyph. If it symbolizes the grower, then perhaps Evil Book is someone who believes that he is, or is pretending to be, the grower. The book is already bigger than that representing Callum, and the arrow suggests a desire for expanding dominion. Speaking for myself, Callum and Yesha meet another rider in the caverns. The larger book symbol with the halos and radiating lines may indicate that he was a surviving guild master of the Guild of Riders. Yesha never mentions his name in her notes. Some explorers who have studied the glyphs nicknamed this person Evil Book, but there is no proof at all that he was actually evil. However, it's certain that the encounter wasn't a good one, since the scene is surmounted by the Bahro sadness symbol. There is a theory that the person may have been Guildmaster Kadish, since Yesha spoke of having gone back in time to save his life. However, there's really no evidence for that theory one way or the other. Indeed, due to later events, it would have been most unlikely. What Yesha did write about this panel was, "But evil will find you, even in the depth of the earth," and Callum was murdered. Next panel, please. Next panel, please. Here we go. Thank you. This is panel 12. Yesha calls it Evil Book Attacks Yesha, and wrote, "Evil Book finds Yesha alone and uses the opportunity to strike at her." Again, the glow surrounds Evil Book's ID glyph, but now it's black rather than white. 6 books are depicted on the enemy's side of the panel. Was the art somehow involved in the conduct of the attack? What is the significance of the cross lightning bolts arching towards Yesha? Speaking for myself, the man seems to be angered by Yesha, probably because she is not following the laws of Denis and the rules of writing that the guild had used since the founding of the caverns. However, I believe that the markings in this panel represent emotions rather than physical attacks, and it's possible that the book symbols here are simply represent his argument about how an age is meant to be written. On the other hand, this is one of those areas where anyone's guess is as good as anyone else's, so I could be dead wrong, and maybe Brett has the right of it, but we don't know. But the thing is we don't know. Next panel, please. This is panel number 13. Callum joins the battle. Brett wrote, "Callum steps in and protects Yesha." The ID glyphs of Callum and Evil Book are juxtaposed within a circle that appears to be radiating energy. Perhaps this symbolizes that the contest was a rider's duel of some type, although the historical record does not give us any indication that such events occurred. There are 3 parallel wavy lines at each of the cardinal points of the circle, which may be related to other occurrences of the 3-line symbology. Yesha doesn't seem to be helping, as her monogram was over her head rather than being in the circle. Callum appears to be producing some sort of protective force field, similar to the one seen in panel 7 of Better Chemo. But the symbology is once again enigmatic, leaving us unable to explain the true methods of attack and defense that were employed. Speaking for myself, in this panel we know that the only thing we know for certain is that Callum has leapt to Yesha's defense and redirects the man's anger to himself rather than her. The arch of lines may represent his attempt to shield Yesha from the man's anger. The idea that he was employing an energy shield to protect her is unlikely. While force fields were not unknown in the Tini Empire, there are only two places where we can find them right now: the Jalak playing grid and the space pod orbiting the planet in the Toldelmer age. So it's the idea that they could generate these things from their hands. This is Denis we're talking about, not Star Wars. Next glyph, please. This is panel number 14. Callum is killed. Brett wrote about this. The skulls on the borders of the panel are typical symbols of death, and Journal 8 states that Callum was murdered. So the panel clearly indicates that more than simple defeat or injury. Evil Book's ID glyph is now bordered in black, another symbol of death. The meaning of the red dots flanking the glyph, 5 on each side, is elusive. Yisha's monogram is now dark instead of light and is positioned above Callum's ID glyph rather than within it or over her head. As well as symbolizing her sorrow over losing someone so close to her, the color may also symbolize feelings of guilt. In Yisha's third Imager speech in End of Ages, she says, "Did I ask to cause the death of Callum?" And that begs the question as, would Callum have been left alone if he had not protected Yisha? Or does her guilt run deeper than that because she is somehow responsible for the circumstances that led to the attack or made it possible? Speaking for myself, the one thing that is clear in this glyph is that the enraged man killed Callum. That was a traumatic event for Yisha and was fundamental to her later development and actions. She became guilt-ridden, believing that it was her fault that Callum died. And there are many hints that she never got over it. Next panel, please. Panel number 15, Yisha continues the battle. Brett wrote about this. Yisha finds the courage and ability to continue the battle against Evil Book on her own. In Journal 9, she wrote, "I learned of the fearsome power I wield on that day, the day of Callum's death." Evil Book appears to be sending minions of some kind to carry out his attack. Are these outworlders that he has either enslaved or allied himself with? They do not resemble the usual glyphs representing the Bahro. Or is this symbolism meant to be abstract as the lightning bolts and the defensive shield in the prior panels? The 12 books usually associated with Callum are depicted to the left of Yisha. This may symbolize Yisha's use of Callum's knowledge in the battle, which more clearly involves the art in this panel and the next. The 2 books in the center of the panel appear to be Yisha's mode of battle, as a small image of Yisha is shown next to each. The 4 symbols on the pages of the top book appear as mirror images on the bottom book. The colors of the squares in the top book are reversed in the bottom book, and the 2 books are linked by lines. Most likely this is a trap of some kind, intended to trick Evil Book and or his minions into choosing the wrong age out of a pair that superficially seemed duplicates. Speaking for myself, in her grief, Yisha attacks the man. It's not clear how the battle was fought, although other explorers have published theories. This glyph seems to imply that both attempted to trap each other in prison ages. One thing is certain, there is no mystical aspect to the fight, since there are no records that indicate that such a thing was possible. Instead, it may have been a deadly game of hide-and-seek, jumping from age to age. Since they were apparently trying to trick each other into using trap books, that's one way they might have done it. Next glyph, please. Glyph 16, Yisha Triumphant. Brett wrote about this. Yisha wins the battle against the evil book. According to Journal 9, in a fit of rage, I destroyed the murderer. However, the bottom portion of the panel seems to show Evil Book as simply being trapped in a book bearing the dark and light square from the top book in panel 15. It is not clear whether Yisha's use of the word destroyed is exaggerated, or whether the symbology simply fails to indicate Evil Book's true fate. Evil Book's ID glyph is either missing or has shrunk considerably. The triumphant Yisha is now depicted with the glow symbol more radiant than ever around her monogram. This adds support to the interpretation of the glow as representing the grower. In Journal 9, she wrote, I began to see that the prophecies of the grower might speak of me, although previously she had thought that Callum might be the grower. As in panel 9, the glyphs and symbols of Callum and Yisha are mingled on the left and right borders of the panel, indicating the full range of her knowledge. Speaking for myself now, the idea that they were using prison ages against each other is supported in this glyph. In the inn, Yisha won and the man is shown trapped in a prison book. What she wrote about this was, power is a gift, power is a curse. I learned of the fearsome power I wield on that day, the day of Callum's death. In a fit of rage, I destroyed the murderer, and I destroyed my innocence. And again, I learned that most things cannot be returned to how they were. And my power continued to grow even as I began to see that the prophecies of the grower might speak of me. My destiny began to be fulfilled, but there was still more. The least. Abused, mistreated, misunderstood, ignored. They were mocked and scorned, and their hearts still show their pain, but they continue to serve. Such power they have, and yet they serve. They treated me with kindness, and I learned from them. They respected what I was becoming. With them, I learned new laws, new rules, and new powers. I used the powers to care for the tree to come, and the tablet allowed me to grow beyond Tiana, beyond father and mother, beyond Denis, beyond Callum. The tablet held them. The tablet chained them. The tablet held me. The tablet empowered me. I watched with them. I waited with them. I learned with them. I called them from captivity and grew while they gathered. Together, we became both weak and strong. And then my time came, my time to take the tablet, my time to choose. I was ready. I felt the pull of holding it, of channeling and releasing the full power of the Bahro. I would right the wrongs. I would set things the way they should be. I would choose well. I could not fail. I am the grower. I was so sure, so strong, so wise, that I didn't know myself, open myself, and listen to the Maker. The noise of me that drowned out his quiet voice. And I failed. Failed to see anything beyond myself in what was obvious. And pain came quickly when I realized what I had done. The tablet returned, and the Bahro continued to serve. The pain still burns me, but the powerful Bahro simply wait and serve. Pain is often how we learn. But it is not for us to give. We are not the teachers. We must not abuse them. We must not abuse the Bahro. Next glyph, please. And this is panel 17, the last panel in the sequence. Brett calls this one Yisha Gathers Followers and said, the called come to the cavern and learn from Yisha. Yisha's monogram and Callum's ID glyph appear separately above her shoulders as she sits at the root of the tree and beckons. 5 book symbols appear below Yisha's arms, but most of them appear blank. Perhaps the filled book represents the past, while the empty books represent the unwritten future. It seems odd that the glow and the spiral do not appear in this panel, which would help to confirm my tentative interpretations, and that no Bahro figures are depicted. Speaking for myself now, this glyph probably represents Yisha enacting her plan to call explorers to come and travel the ages of Dini and each free a Bahro soul from enslavement. This plan fulfills a passage in Words of the Watcher in which the Watcher refers to people called to the cavern as the gathered. Yisha herself, though, eventually grew angry by the slow progress of the plan and went so far as to insult the called who did not respond in one of her message recordings. Her exact words were, "Have I not become the grower? The grower. Yet all I grow is anger. Watching them call, watching them fail, waiting and watching. I am the grower. How can I wait much longer on such fools?" She spoke of watching each of her Bahro call for a gathered to come, and evidently it was not often successful, prompting her to label those who did not come as fools. A theory has been proposed that the people who hear Yisha's call may have a trace of Dini ancestry. The possibility exists because a number of workers vanished early in Dini history while digging air ventilation shafts to the surface. However, that's purely speculation, and there's no evidence that supports or refutes it. It goes along with the idea that the Ahmad people, whom Gen visited when he met and fell in love with his wife Keta, were descendants of the missing Dini workers. Again, there's just no evidence one way or the other. And now we get to a subject that's kind of controversial. Who is Evil Book? This is Brett's statement on that matter, and again, I'll follow it up with my own take. To close this analysis, I would like to venture deep into speculative waters and offer a suggestion regarding the actual identity of Evil Book. My discussion will explore the supporting evidence for my contention, but will make little effort to be fair and balanced, though much of the evidence is certainly capable of other interpretations. Be warned, my previous theory regarding the identity of Teacher, which was quickly exploded by the release of End of Ages, so my track record is not good. I strongly suspect that Evil Book is none other than ex-Guildmaster Kadish. My suspicion begins with Yisha's apparent fixation on the character. His age of Telessa was one of the 4 primary ages chosen to represent the lessons of Yisha's first journey for the Calm. His life permeates the lessons of the second journey along the path of the Shell, and his death and rebirth are intimately involved with the climax of that journey. What makes this defrocked writer, minor merchant, and pathological liar so important? From Yisha's Bahro case speeches in Uru, Ages Beyond Mist, only death can conquer pride so strong. For Yisha, it was the death that moved me to return. It was death that moved me to return. I submit that the source of her pride was the power she gained through her studies with Callum, and it was only Callum's death that could shock her out of it, making the statement a reference to the battle in this sequence. Yisha feels responsible for the death of Callum, though Evil Book killed him. For Yisha's third imager speech from End of Ages, in which she said, "Did I ask to cause the death of Callum?" I believe her pride led her to an act that ultimately resulted in the battle with Evil Book, which is why she feels responsible, and why Callum's death was the cure she needed. If she did not feel responsible, then Callum's death would simply be a tragedy and not a lesson, and she has already told her that the lesson of death is about the consequences of pride. When did this prideful act take place? I suggest that her pride was at its greatest height in the first flush of discovering her power, as she learned from Callum and taught him. What was this prideful act? The torn note written by Yisha and found in Kadish's empty vault is plainly written by someone in the grip of a pride that borders on megalomania. From the 4th fragment, These are the powers of gods, and I now have this power. This note suggests that Yisha saved Kadish's life during her prideful period. Did Yisha then just leave him in the vault with no option but to link back to Denis and die there? Just to give him a nobler end than the one he originally chose for himself? Even if that would demonstrate incredible arrogance on her part, but it seems unlikely. I suggest that she brought him forward in time to make use of his undoubted skills in the rebirth of Denis, so his end would not be the waste that she considered it, based on her scrawling on Kadish's last testament. Yisha's victory in the battle also resulted in a loss of innocence, according to her journals. In addition to pride, was innocence required to motivate Yisha's actions in the vault? I think the answer to that is yes. A sophisticated person would have thought twice about using such wondrous power to alter the history of someone of Kadish's character. I believe it took a significant degree of naivety to save his life long after his death, and that Yisha was then naive enough to expect lasting gratitude and respect from the deceiver. This again suggests that the rescue of Kadish took place prior to Callum's death, as Yisha no longer had such innocence afterward. The vault note is in fragments. Why? I believe that Yisha later tore it up in angry remorse because her prideful act of saving Kadish's life went tragically wrong. If she had simply saved Kadish's life and let him go his own way, or if Kadish had gone on to do good works and be kind to widows and orphans, I don't see what reason she would have had to revisit the vault or tear up the note, or to add to her list of lessons about pride and death. Her proud act would have justified itself in this case. But these things become understandable if her act turned out to be a major mistake with a deadly impact. The glow symbol suggests that Evil Book considered himself to be the grower, or was at least a pretender to the grower's powers, assuming my interpretation of the symbolism is correct. This description certainly fits what we know of Kadish. Thus, Kadish would have had a strong motive to attack Yisha and or Callum once he found out that one of them might be a competitor for the title. This is especially true if Kadish had actually deluded himself into believing he was the grower. His hunger for power would have led him to try and wipe out any potential challengers, and he certainly couldn't have deceived Yisha or Callum into becoming followers. Kadish was originally a rider, as Evil Book seems to be. Evil Book's red costume is suggestive of the red cloak on Kadish's skeleton, and the pictured headgear suggestive of the helmet found in the alternate vault. While these parallels are far too thin to stand on their own, I believe they do add to the weight of other evidence. And now, speaking for myself about this subject, Brett Middleton's theory about Kadish being Evil Book is an attractive one that is very popular among explorers, including my fellow guide, Arterton. However, I don't believe it's true. There are several reasons, but the most compelling one involves the time travel aspect. We know from her journal that Yisha did not learn the Bahro version of the art, which allowed her to circumvent time, until after Callum was murdered. She stated that quite clearly in one of the quotes I read to you earlier. This means her project to rescue Kadish would have had to take place after Callum died. And I simply cannot believe that Yisha would have gone back in time to the fall of Denis and rescued Kadish just so she could bring him forward in time so he could murder her mentor. There is also the statement that she made about meeting the writer nicknamed Evil Book. She said, "But evil will find you even in the depths of the earth," and Callum was murdered. The key is how she phrased it. She said that evil found them, not that she had brought evil to him. If she truly blamed herself for Callum's death, you'd think she would have said so. In the end, though, it is up to each and every one of you to decide for yourselves what you choose to believe about that event. All that really matters is that it was the second traumatic event in her life and was instrumental in driving her to hate her Denis heritage. Up until then, She had been quite objective with her views of their society, but afterwards she expressed nothing but contempt for Denis. Okay, and that's it for the lecture here. So do we have any questions? You'd never suspect that this little cave would have held such significance, would you? Okay, no questions? In that case, Mirfak, I guess we're ready to move on to the next location. Okay, since this has already been a very long tour, I'm going to try and keep this fairly brief. This spot is the third and last of the Bahro caves. This cave was created specifically for Yisha's quests and puzzles, and there are actually 6 instances of this cave. The main role of the cave was initially to house the pillars that were used in her first plan to free Bahro from their bondage to the Denis Empire. The cave is located in the center of the roof of a residential cavern called Radenna. Radenna is one of 4 main living residential caverns that we know the names of. The caverns are Denis, Radenna, Urat, and Rolet. This is the second of 2 versions of the Pillar Cave. In the first version of this cave, of course, the light is blue, and when you leap down into the hole in the center of the room, you seem to be falling into a starry expanse similar to the star fissure of Riven. This cave, of course, was accessed by the journey doors in Garisan, Teledan, Kadesh Talessa, and Eder Kimo. Each door, of course, links to one of the 4 sides of the cave, at which time the corresponding plate extends to make room for you to stand on. On each platform is a pillar that corresponds to the age you came from and a viewer symbol. There are also 2 touchable symbols on the cave wall. The first symbol is a hand symbol which is used to transport the pillar, and the second one is the Bahroglyph of Yisha, which holds a recording of a speech she wrote about the corresponding age. When you first enter this cave, as I mentioned, it's illuminated with blue light, but when all 4 pillars have been taken from it, the illumination changes to the yellow-orange you see now. Mirfak, can you take us to one of the
Shora,
puzzle caves?
peace to you, mover of the least. 7 more journeys have moved you closer. I was seduced while in Denis. My humble darkness lasted only a short time before I began to bask in what I could do, what I could write. My gift, my path, the knowledge of my father and the dreams of my mother pierced a hole in the darkness, in the weakness. I was aware of my power and I was proud. Whole worlds at my fingertips. It was the same with the Denis, the same cycle.
Okay, this is another of the types of instances of this cave. In this case, this is one of the caves involved in the gardens puzzles, where you have to use the 7 cloths in a pattern in order to make the gate open. The light here is primarily blue, but it has purple and yellow to it as well. And in all of these caves, the colors are basically the same, but the predominance of blue or purple or yellow changes according to whichever cave we're in. This is the cave for the Pod Age puzzle. And while it looks very similar to the other one, you'll notice that the center light hanging in the room is much brighter. And in this instance, you'll notice that the light is a lot more yellow than it was in the others. This is the puzzle cave for Minkata. By the way, if you've never actually gone and taken a close look at the wedges that are floating over the well in Yorelto, I encourage you to go back and look at them sometime. They're actually extremely beautiful. On each one of the wedges, you'll find the symbol of the quest that they came, or puzzle that they came from, as well as the various other markings. So again, if you haven't taken a close-up look at those wedges, please do so. It's well worth the time. Now, I had mentioned that this is the only, this cave basically drops us down into a cavern, and it's the only time that you ever see a Denis cavern other than Denis itself. I don't count Ashemen, which I showed you earlier, among that because it's not a residential cavern. One of the things to watch for is that when you go down there, you'll notice that in the center of the lake, if it were the Denis cavern, you would be able to see Agra Island, and it's just not here. The reason why we know, by the way, that this was a place, that this is called Ravenna, is because, speaking out of character for just a moment, in Denis Complete Chronicles, or the original Uru Ages Beyond Mist, your key actually told you that you were in Ravenna. Mirfak, can you show us the cavern outside? Oh yes, this is the fourth cave, which is for the Path of the Shell, and this is the one that you access from Annonay and Urkana. Fairly soon, when he's set up, Mirfak will take us outside of this cave so that we can look. Here we go, speak of the devil. And you'll get a look at Ravenna Cavern. Again, this is a different residential cavern than the one we normally see from the residential neighborhoods or Agra Island. Anyway, that's the end of today's tour. The next tour will be in 2 weeks, of course. Let's see, anything else that I know of that I need to mention? No, that's pretty much it, except for the fact that Joker is going to be playing music for our party, and of course, after we've given you a short time to look around the cavern, anyway, Mirfak is going to start playing with it, and we'll just have to wait and see what he does. Thank you all for coming, and I'll see you next time. By the way, I will be here to answer questions if you have any, if you think of any afterwards. Joker? Oh, by the way, before I turn it over to Joker, I did want to mention how much I appreciate Mirfak and the job that he did on this tour. I gave him a set of criteria for things that I was a kind of wish list, and he not only did them, but he went above and beyond and did things that we had never seen before on any of the previous tours, and we've been doing this for something like 4 years now. Okay, Joker, please make your announcement.